Welcome to this moderated event. This is our AES Financial Literacy Masterclass. The two professors that we have here today are Jacob Belser and Chandler Bridges, both professors of the Audio Engineering and Sound Production Department. There's Garrett.
Why don't we pin that?
Yeah. My name is Olivia Porter. I'll be leading the discussion along with Keon. So let's go ahead and get started. Do you guys want to just introduce yourselves and kind of talk a little bit about your background?
Sure. Go for it. All right. Well, I don't know who else is watching us, but or we'll see this later, but I'm Chandler Bridges and teach in the audio engineering department here at the Jacob School. And I spent a good bulk of my career out in Los Angeles as a paying my dues first and then as a freelance engineer. I also have a lot of extra side projects, things like owning a microphone company, and I like to dabble in restaurants and retail stores and other entrepreneurial activities.
How many businesses have you owned?
A lot. I'm more than 17. I need to reach. I need to get a new data list going. But yeah.
I'm Jake Belser, also a teacher in the audio engineering department. In addition to doing that, I've owned a recording studio for 28 years, 27 years, recording all kinds of things. So I've really only owned one business with a few different variations on it. But that's plenty.
So let's get started. Were there any specific questions that you?
Well, I was thinking maybe it would be helpful for us to do some introductions so we could get an idea of who's in this room and what they're interested in hearing about.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
Sure. Hi everyone. My name is Noah. I'm a first year student in the audio engineering program here at Jacobs, and I'm just wanting to come here and learn more about what I can do to prepare myself.
Hi, I'm Seth. I'm a third year in the audio program. And I don't know, any advice from them is welcome. So I'm here to listen.
Hi, I'm Will. I'm also a first year in the audio program, and I just want to hear it as much as I can before I leave. So.
My name is Daisha, and I'm first year doctoral in composition program. I don't already know what to expect, but it'd be nice to hear someone talk that's not from the comp department.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm Keon. I'm a first year master's student in composition. I'm the NME assistant also this year. And I started an LLC this summer for my music related stuff, and I have no idea what I'm doing. So I'm curious about that a little bit.
I'm Olivia Porter. I am the treasurer for the Audio Engineering Society. I'm also a third year in the Audio Engineering and Sound Production Department. And I'm also pursuing a concentration in arts administration, specifically in law. Roger, do you want to go?
Yeah, I'm Roger. I'm the vice president of the Audio Engineering Society right now. I am also an audio engineering major, third year, and I have a concentration in music entrepreneurship as well. And in this conversation, I just, hoping to learn more about what to expect as a freelancer, as a business owner, and, what I should look out for, I guess. Yeah.
My name is Lucas Wright. I'm in Kelly, actually, but I dabble in music production, audio engineering, and have been for the past year. And this is my first time here, so I didn't really know what to expect, but I'm just all ears today.
I am Max DeBella, also third year in the audio program, and I've gotten more into freelancing these past couple of years, and so I'd love to hear about the financial aspect of how to go about doing that and improving that.
Luke, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Luke Charlier. I'm a third year in audio. And the most notable thing I do entrepreneur-wise, I run a union in town called Audio Student Productions. We do live sound reinforcement for anybody who wants it. So recently it's gotten really legitimate. So I'm interested to hear your professional perspective. I feel like we don't get to talk about that a lot, about the money side of audio. how to negotiate a contract, what pitfalls to look out for, that sort of stuff.
So speaking of that, let's go ahead and start out with the money side of audio. So do you want to talk about kind of how you negotiate your rates, or what kind of rates you set? Do you do like itemized billing, or how do you kind of set up how much you charge for your services?
I'll go first here. So, for me, some of it is just experience and having done it for so long. But it's also related to costs and anticipated business level. Bloomington is a weird spot financially because there are a lot of people that want to do work around here, but there are a lot of students, and the students tend to have a little bit less money. So the kind of rates that you could get in a larger city, even a mid-sized city like Indianapolis, you can never get in Bloomington. But since I own the business and also do engineering work, I kind of subdivide it. So I have to look at expenses versus potential income over days, weeks, months, and years. So to set a base rate to keep it affordable, but at least a little bit profitable for me, I look at primarily my monthly expenses, and I include the basic amount of money I would set aside for general maintenance, general upkeep, software upgrades, and so on. So I take that number and really divide it by number of days I think I can have the entire day booked, which is I usually base that on a 12-day month. And then that ends up being my basic rate. There are months where it doesn't get a full 12 days of booking for one reason or another. There are months where it's 28 days booked. So it kind of balances out in the end. It's okay. It's not a super profitable business as the standalone studio part of it. But the other part of that for me is how much I charge for engineering work. That is money that doesn't go to the business necessarily, but goes to me, and that's on top of the business money. So if we subdivide it that way, then I can do no engineering, but have the studio booked for 15 days a month, and still either like make a little bit of profit or break even somewhere in that zone without having lifted a finger, or at least that month lifted a finger. And I found that that's a number that works out okay. But as always, it would be nice to be able to charge more. I also have found two things. One, you get to a point where you charge a certain amount and you get a higher level of business. But if you don't get that just right, you get vanity projects, people who have a lot of money who want to record their 40-year-old white guy blues band. And we're 50, so so we're past that. And that's no fun either. So trying to get the sweet spot where you can record the kind of projects that are good, that have some legs, that are enjoyable to do, that maybe will spark someone else's career, versus pure profit is a tricky place to be in. I think in a lot of larger cities, there's a lot of studios that will record those vanity projects. They may make a decent amount of money, but I know that all the engineers that are doing that are extremely burned out, and they really kind of hate what they're doing, and they end up not attracting the better quality engineers. The better quality engineers won't be doing that kind of work. Okay.
What was the question?
Just talking about like how you negotiate your rates, or like how you kind of set up your what's the word I'm thinking of, like almost like an itemized billing of like what you charge for what.
So there's so many different ways you can make money. And I think to Jake's point, having a brick and mortar business, a location, a studio, which I like to think of as like a hotel. People rent this out. And then does it come with an engineer or do they need an engineer? And a lot of these vanity projects, they call them COD projects out in LA. It's somebody's got a song in their heart and they want to record it and they come in. And so the staff engineer or the assistant engineer that is part of that studio is the person that becomes the engineer in that moment. He gets to do that work. And they get paid a little bit more in Los Angeles, being an engineer for a COD project than you would if you're an assistant engineer working for the studio. It's interesting because when you work for a studio, which is where most people start, unless they open their own studio, you've got a boss. And that's a very different prospect than trying to be your own boss and freelance. And so for freelancing, I would say, how do you negotiate your rate? Well, you keep your rate as high as you possibly can. One person gave me some advice when I first started working in LA freelancing, say, keep your rate high. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to keep your rate high because there's some people who you can't afford to work with you. And so what is a reasonable rate? What is minimum wage? You don't really want to work less than minimum wage. And then what do other people who do similar jobs get paid? What does the HVAC technician get paid? What does the car mechanic get paid? What does it cost to get a plumber in? Minimum hourly rate, by the job, and all of these things go into how you're going to structure a way to make money. I have the luxury of working with a manager who takes 15% of my money. And one would think that a manager will get you work, and he gets me no work. I don't think he's ever gotten me any work ever, but he takes 15% of my money. But what's great about that is I don't negotiate my rate. And so if Olivia, if you wanted to work with me on a project, I would say, oh, that's so great. I can't wait to work with you. It's going to be so much fun. Call Steven. And then I would tell Steven, I say, Steven, I obviously want my rate, but I want to do this project. So whatever you can work out with Olivia, it's fine with me. So whether I'm making less than minimum wage or my actual day rate that I'd like, I kind of leave that up to Steven. Steven's on my side and advocates for me because he gets 50% of what I make. So the more he can get out of you, the more money he'll make. I think about it though, if he has 8 people doing work, that's like one person doing work. If he's taking 15% from all these different places. So, he's okay as well. That's one of the really tricky things. Being able to be outside of the negotiation process, I think is wonderful. Because otherwise it's like now we have to talk about money. And I would much rather be talking about art and creativity and the vision for your project. If you're working with a label, it's a whole different animal too, because first, they're not going to pay you quickly. So you've got to factor that in. And they have the money. There's usually a decent budget. And you can get a better rate. So that's a tough question. What do I have to bring? Only me. So depending on the type of session, I don't have any pest control, insurance. I don't have to have somebody pick up my trash and water and power and sorry to be bringing up all this. Payroll and property taxes and mortgage payment and maintenance and repairs and should I stop? There are a lot of factors that are going to affect how much money Jake can charge for his hourly rate. Whereas me, I'm just simply trading my time for money. So then it becomes opportunity cost. Am I going to miss out on another type of project because I've tied myself up in this project? I don't want to take a month-long project for a low rate and then not be able to take some higher rate projects that might come along in the meantime. So it's always tricky and difficult. I could talk about this for like 3 hours, so I'm stop and let you ask me more questions about it. Yeah.
Going off of like working for money, I've talked to a couple of the graduates from our program, and it seems like sometimes they don't get paid for, they're working for somewhat of a big name. They're not getting paid, and then that may or may not lead to getting a job because of that name or because of connection that they met through that work. What's
90 days? It takes 90 days to get paid.
Yeah. What's the balance between, if you could elaborate on what's the balance between how much your time's worth and then also not getting paid because you might be working for someone who has good connections and can get you a job.
I mean, my take on this is that when you first graduate from a program like ours, that you should go and work for a studio. And then that way you have a guaranteed job as much as that studio is relying on being booked. And it's not about you were trying to create a network and bring in that money. The other thing that would come out of that is that if you are self-employed, which is what freelancing is, and you don't have the LLC structure or S Corp or C Corp or some other structure in place, your tax rate can be as high as 51%. And if you're paying out 51% in taxes, which seems criminal, I don't know if that is, but you know, you're charging $100 an hour. Now you're bringing in 49, or if you're charging $50 an hour, now you're bringing in 25. That gets difficult to negotiate that. So I think if you set up the business structure and you have some other things in place, it can be a little bit different.
I think that you should never work for free. Sometimes it could be an exchange. Maybe you work for a very low amount, but if you, this does not just apply to anybody. If you work for free, you're valued at zero. And they value your skills and the skills of other professionals in your field as worthless.
Yeah, I think that's so important that you devalue what we do. You make what we do worth nothing if you work for me.
But you can make the deal like this, the person you really want to work with, like, okay, well, I've got to make some money, so I'll do it for $200 cash, whatever, and you pay me right away, or, you know, something like that. If you really feel like it's something that you want to be involved with, something that maybe could expand your career, but never for free.
Does that apply to like internships too?
No, internships, especially if they're a structured internship, then that's a different thing. But for an internship, if you were going to intern for me after your 4th year in school, great. We're going to do the number of hours it takes, and you'll get to learn how to use certain things and get whatever experience I can offer in that time. And that'll count for college credit, so you're paying for it. But if you're doing an internship that is not part of the college credit, which a lot of people do, and they're often free, it really becomes your responsibility to extract the information that you want out of that internship. And if you're not getting the information you want, you should not do it. So it's hard to differentiate that, but I would not recommend interning for, let's say, a guitar player. Big mistake. You don't want to intern for the guitar player in a rock band. But maybe an odd internship would be to be an intern for a front of house engineer that does big stadium concerts. You're probably going to work really hard, and they'll probably buy you lunch and dinner, but they may not pay you in that case. But you might get a lot out of that. So there's not a great answer for internships. That becomes a real personal decision. And unfortunately, some people are in a better financial position to do a 2-month internship unpaid and not for credit than others. And that's an industry problem, not just audio, but music in general. Certainly the film industry has had major issues with that over the years, including a number of very high profile lawsuits and a Department of Labor ruling that addressed that significantly.
Los Angeles is going to be a little bit better with their strict labor laws about getting paid for internships. So you're less likely to land an internship where you don't get paid in a big city or in a market where there's strong labor laws. But yes, what are you going to get out of it? I always say, get a job. You know, if the path to your dream job is through an unpaid internship, do it. That's fine. But otherwise, just seek out that entry level job. And then, of course, you have to do an internship in a program like ours. You have to do an internship to graduate. And I don't know if it's a little known secret or not, but if you landed a job, we would most likely let that count as well. And so that's something to be talked about with the chair of the department, whoever's supervising the internship, but. If you find some great job in a studio and they want to hire you and pay you money, as long as they're willing to do that internship paperwork and oversee some of that, that usually works out just as well.
So, on the topic of labor, let's talk a little bit about unions. So, do you know what is the union? What's the word I'm trying to look for? Are there any audio unions? Are there any audio adjacent unions? Things that people who are interested in audio might be interested in joining. I know there's IATSE. I don't know if either of you have any sort of experience with IATSE, but just any kind of audio adjacent unions, or if there are, should we join them?
So IATSE is the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, and most reputable venues, certainly a large auditorium, will be staffed by the IATSE stage group. And that is overall a pretty good union. It does give a level of insurance to the people coming in that they're going to be qualified workers that can do a good job. So around Bloomington, for example, the IU Auditorium is IATSE, Alumni Hall is IATSE, Assembly Hall, and the football stadium, when there's events there, that's all through the union, and a number of other events go through the union. The MAC, for example, is exempt from the union, but we do have one union employee in the MAC. The head electrician in the MAC is IATSE. But there's a special agreement with the stagehand union to allow that to be a student-run organization. If the MAC were staffed by IATSE crew, we would maybe be able to do one opera a year and maybe 2 concerts per semester. It would be outrageously expensive. So it works out in the music school's favor, generally speaking. And if you become an IATSE member in a smaller area like Bloomington, you might be able to go to New York and join the union there, because you already have the union card. In New York, everybody on Broadway is going to be IATSE, and it gives you a good in. It's generally pretty good pay, pretty good safety, pretty good training, but it is tough work. 14-hour days, sometimes 18-hour days. I've done 20-hour IATSE union calls before, and it's tough. And then there's also a couple other unions that are related, IBEW and AFL-CIO. Film unions.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, film's great for unions. I think it's worth mentioning that if you are outside of the live sound or film world and you're thinking about doing studio work, that there is no union. And so I do the 20-hour days without the protection and the breaks and the pay structure that you would normally expect. Contracts are something we'll probably get into a little bit. You can negotiate anything in a contract. Anything 2 people agree on is okay. And so you can get yourself into some issues in the studio world where maybe on an internship or in an entry-level position, you've agreed to take some sort of salary. So then it gets to be this gray area about, are you working too many hours and how much can they work you? And it's tricky. Then there's also the performers. If you're going to be a voice actor, or if you're going to play an instrument, then we've got AFM and SAG-AFTRA. And those also have regulations. There are lots of perks and benefits that come from it, insurance opportunities, because as a freelancer, you often don't get, you have to buy your own insurance through the Affordable Care Act or some group policy. So some of the unions are good about that. I think doing live production and theater and film, having that union benefit is huge. But there's plenty of students that I've known over the years that are, and myself included, like, I want to do music work in the studio. And so then it's not an option. You're just out of luck on that.
I'm just wondering if you're, let's say you want to go into post-production for like video games, is there any type of union for that, or is that more working with the company for a contract sort of?
It's both. You get, that would generally be done through a company. And so anytime you're working for a company instead of being a freelancer, you've gotten yourself into the discussion of what are the benefits packages. Is there a retirement plan? What kind of insurance are they providing? And some of it's mandated that they have to based on the number of employees and what city or state that they're located in. But yeah, and post for game work, you could be in the unions and have some coverage there. It's really the audio studio world where you're out in the cold.
So going back to contracts, do either of you use contracts for your services? And if you do, what kind of things do you typically outline in those?
No, I don't use contracts. I've tried contracts in the past and it's of course a great idea, but people get weird when they talk about music and contracts. They think record deal. And you're gonna take my masters. But there's some basic laws that protect me. Basic copyright law. If someone comes in, records in studio with me for 5 days, never pays me, releases a record, and they make $1 million, I'm gonna take every time of that $1 million. Because I still own the mechanical copyrights, physical recording. They never paid me for it, so it's mine. If they released it without my permission, that's the last I knew it was $120,000 fine per violation. So if they sell one song, that's $120,000. One song to one person, and it piles up. Now chances are that will be negotiated to something realistic, but I don't know. Someone did that to me and they made $1 million. I might take it all. Yeah, I guess pretty much. So I do stay away from contracts. That being said, there are some times where contracts come into play if I'm doing work for a larger organization. Even a place like IU, if you're doing work at IU, you have to obtain a purchase order, which is in essence a contract. And you complete the work, you turn in the purchase order, and in 6 to 8 business months, you get paid.
So I think jumping off of that, it's worth mentioning this PO idea. We call purchase order a PO. And when you negotiate as a freelancer, if I were to have a big gig with some big artist at Sony, for example, I would need to get a PO. And so usually a PO is a number, purchase order number. And so they have agreed to a certain set of terms and they issue this preliminary purchase order. They're going to buy my services at whatever negotiated rate. But because this is not like in the normal world of business, a lot of times they'll just say, oh yeah, Mary said it was okay. And so then on your invoice, which is something you all need to practice making, you put in the purchase order block, the PO block, you would say verbal, Mary. 99% of the time it's verbal, and you hope you know who it was that approved the purchase order, and you hope that they don't quit, get fired, leave, have a baby, whatever it might be, before you go and get paid. Because I have had many times when people in the offices, the business office will change at a large company. You're like, oh, I don't see a purchase order for this. Oh yeah, it was verbal from Mary. Oh, well, Mary's not here anymore. And then you have to try and figure things out from there. You can always put an injunction on the release of an album and things like that, but then you're that guy that puts the injunction on the release of an album for something coming out on Sony, and you never work again. So it's a difficult thing to negotiate. In Los Angeles, if you have business cards, you are not making it. You are not successful. That's just kind of like a fact of LA. And contracts, like Jake said, people don't like contracts. And so there's a lot of this oral agreement where we say, everything is verbal, right? Oral contract or written contract is verbal. So it's not a verbal agreement, it's an oral agreement that we will have these certain arrangements, and on your word, you're gonna do the work, and we're gonna pay you as agreed. It gets a little dicey, which is very different than like a writer or something that you see in live sound where people are booking an event or a space. There is one contract that I like to use, but it's kind of a fake contract. And this is a master release agreement. So when I record something and I have to use my hard drive and then give you the files, do I need to hold on to the files? Whereas Max, now that he's got the files, his project, responsible person that he is, now gonna hold on to the files. Because I've had lots of people who will come back like 5 years later and say, oh, I need that vocal up mix for that song we did in 2004. And I have no idea what hard drive it's on, or if I even still have it, or if it was an SD2 file that I posted to Google Drive and it got corrupted, or who knows, right? So I have this form that I like to, when I deliver a master, you know, even if it's just a mix, where it says, you are now responsible for these files. I have passed the baton, and you need to, and really this contract serves just as notification. Like, hey, I'm probably not gonna have your files later. You should hold on to it. But it's less of a contract in the sense, like what we would think about is more of a trying to teach them that they need to keep up with their files. Yeah.
I went to a master class with CLA where he talked about this similar topic, and he started talking about this exact scenario, and he said what he does is he intentionally stores and organizes all the recordings that he ever does, because he says that the frequency that people come back and ask for their recordings gives him the opportunity to charge them enough that it makes sense for him to do that.
Yep.
So
I love that. Keep your rate high,
Yeah.
right?
so you can just charge them more to get.
So then, you know, part of that is how would you give them notice of that?
Mhm.
And so I still think there's some kind of, you know, you don't want to burn your bridges. You don't want to alienate your clients. But yeah, I mean, if you needed to get a new copy of the files and you knew ahead of time that it was going to be $250 delivery fee for whatever mixes at any time, then yeah, you would probably
Go to
hold on to them.
primarysoundstudios.com.
Oh, it's gonna be.
Share your screen.
Yeah.
Or are
Yeah.
you talking about on the lab? Oh, you're gonna join the Zoom. Okay.
But if I'll pull this up and then we can keep going. Just really quick. What kind of invoicing software do you guys use for invoices or?
I have been using QuickBooks Online for quite a long time. It's very good, but it's gotten out of hand expensive. It's $45 a month now, and I'm sending out 3-4 invoices a month. It's just not worthwhile. And you can pay online, but they take higher percentage. So I'm using a simple invoice tool via Squarespace, who we're going to see the Squarespace scheduling calendar in a second here, to do invoicing. And you know, it is so rare that I am sending out an invoice, you know, 50 a year at most, maybe 30 a year. That's just not worthwhile to use QuickBooks for me anymore. And nobody cares. I think that the benefit of QuickBooks to me was it was tying everything together, and it allowed people to pay directly from the invoice. But now so many different places do that, including just PayPal or Venmo. You can just make an invoice straight from there. As I would say, save your money on that. Keep track of your bank account. Otherwise, it's just too much money.
I make it in Word, and if I have to request the money through PayPal or something, I just copy and paste it in, or use add it as an attachment. A lot of the bigger labels have portals, online portals, and then you go and enter the information there or upload the invoice there. And generally, you would have. I usually get paid by check, which is kind of an interesting, old, outdated format. But if it's a label, then you're going to get a check cut, and it'll just come in the mail or direct deposit if you want to set that up. So, but yeah, QuickBooks, Squarespace, PayPal, all of those will work. I think the most important thing about invoicing is, do you keep good records? And I would suggest that everyone, and I'm guilty of not doing this as well as I wish I had in my life, which is why I like to say it, that you should start some sort of online database, Google Sheets, something that documents every single thing that you ever do. And you will be able to look back on it and remember certain sessions and certain events, and it will just be this amazing scrapbook of information. But it will also help you to not be bogged down with this invoice process. Some people want detail. What was the song title or song titles for that day? And what were the hours that you worked and what location? So if I'm working at Westlake Studio, then I'm going to work at East West or different studios. They might want me to list which studio, which artist, which song. And so by keeping track of all that, was it vocal tuning or was it cutting drums? And just keeping that long going list will be so wonderful when you're my age and you don't remember who you worked with. Credits are something else we can talk about in the scheme of all of this stuff, but you can't rely on other people's credits, and it's getting worse and worse. I think not necessarily better as things are streamed more and less physical products are released. And so you really need to keep up with that on your own. And then from there, it's pretty easy to create an invoice. What's the hours? Is it a day rate? Is it, I think you mentioned this earlier, and I'll go ahead and say it. My hourly rate times 10 is my day rate, and you get 12 hours for that.
Mhm.
So if I charged $1 an hour, I would charge you $10 for the day, and you would get 12 hours. And everything over 12 hours would be some rate, either the same hourly rate or time and a half or something like that. But I think knowing what that schema is, how you want to lay out your time, trade your time for money. That's what I consider work, is trading your time for money. Having an idea about that before you go into the negotiations really helps. Say, okay, well, if I'm only going to get paid $1 an hour, then I would rather sit at home and like organize my garage or put together that, new acoustic treatment I wanted to try or whatever it may be.
I go to the studio thing real quick here. So just go ahead and select standard recording session, the top one. So how about book 4 hours with me? So here you can choose to buy a few things and stuff. At some point in this booking process, it will make you click a checkbox that says, I understand that the files are my your responsibility. If it were you filling out, it'd be my responsibility, and that you won't hold me or the studio liable for long-term storage of your files, because it is a enormous problem. In 2020, the summer of COVID, I don't know, there's a 2-week period in the summer where nobody had anything to do. They all wanted to release material they hadn't thought about in years. I was pulling stuff up from as far back as 18 years earlier. And some people were like, how come you don't have my files? It was from 2007. I don't know. And one person was like, I can't remember the name of the song or the year or the project, but I know I did it. I never found it, but so for me, this little scheduling thing is a decent substitute for a contract, and it also allows people to pay immediately, and that payment is all handled without me. I'm not negotiating the price. It's right there.
Is this Square or Calendly?
This is Squarespace. Yeah, and it generally has been working pretty well for me. And it doesn't solve everything, but it solves a lot of problems. And again, covers the negotiation and the contract element of all that.
Does it database everything for you too, or do you have to just put it in like an Excel, like they did this session at this time?
It'll database it for you. It's not super easy to extract that, but it's there.
Yeah, I want to add about the getting paid part, that it is really hard sometimes to get paid. And lots of people talk about a penalty. If you don't pay within 30 days, then you're going to accrue interest of 15%. You'll never, ever, ever get that. And some of you were around when Laura Sis came and talked, and she does an amazing idea, which I thought was just absolutely brilliant. She has her rate set such that she can give a discount if you pay on time. And so her invoices say that if you pay by this 30-day date, then you receive a 10% discount. And so, of course, most people won't pay by that date, or some people will be motivated by that. I thought it was incredibly clever to do it that way. Instead of as a punishment, it's a reward for being on time. But what I find is, I mean, I'm still owed $1,000 from Sony, and I'm not happy about it, from like 2002 on this gig that I cannot. It was for a movie called What's the Worst That Could Happen, which is, not not getting paid. And it's tough because things get lost in the shuffle, even with somebody who's got plenty of money like that to make the payment. And I've got another story, but I'll stop with my one bad story about getting paid. But usually it's 90 days, and that's if you're lucky.
So, going into a different topic, I wanted to talk about LLCs a little bit. I assume both of you own some kind of LLC. The majority of us here don't 100% understand what an LLC was or is. So, would you be able to explain that and kind of describe like how you operate yours?
Are you an LLC?
I don't mind talking about this.
Um,
I don't like LLCs.
There's a good reason for that. I'll do my.
Sure.
I am an LLC. My Primary Sound Studios LLC is my business name. So it stands for Limited Liability Company. It's not a federal designation. It's by state. So my LLC is just an amendment, Schedule C, to my tax return, my personal tax return. That could come to bite me, or it could benefit me. It happens in this last couple of years. It has wildly benefited me. But if something were to happen, if I were to get sued, I have a $2 million liability insurance policy. Let's say someone calls under the SSL and it collapses on them, and they sue me for $10 million. Well, because I'm an LLC, they could still come after me personally. Other businesses, corporations, there's a firewall between your personal life and that. But for me, the LLC has made sense because it's allowed me to subtract business losses, buying a giant console, from my personal income, some of which comes from IU with as taxes taken out. So that means that I get this enormous tax refund, and it's working out. But I probably will change it to S Corp in the next 2 to 3 years, when all my losses have really popped out and I need to put that claw up.
What would be the benefit of S corp over the LLC for you?
So the Secretary of State in each state is where you designate this structure. And you can be profit or nonprofit, and nonprofit doesn't mean you don't make money. It's got a different, beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. But in the profit side of things, you can be an LLC or a corporation, and then you can designate that as an S corp, or what's known as a C corp. And I like C corps, okay, which is not what your accountant will tell you to do. And we'll talk about that in a quick second. The S corp becomes its own, a corporation becomes its own entity instead of a limited liability company. And being its own entity, it has its own social security number. It's like a person. It exists. I don't own it necessarily. I'm either a agent of the corporation or a director of the corporation. Something like that. It really becomes its own person. And we call it an FEIN, or a federal employee ID number, and that's that same number of digits as your social security number. You get to deduct a few more things. You're afforded a little bit better insulation from lawsuits and other issues. The S corp is like the LLC in the sense that the money that comes into that S corp then transfers over to your personal account. And so you just do your regular, your account includes the money for the business. The C corp, it's completely separate. And so the problem that you will hear about is if I make a C corp, and let's say I make $100 and I pay out $50 in taxes, and I've got $50 in the C corp left over, and then I want to pay Chandler $50 and give me the $50. Now I have to pay taxes on that $50. Well, wait a minute. We already paid taxes on that money. The corporation earned that money and paid taxes on it. Then the corporation handed it to me, and now I'm paying taxes. So we call that double taxation. That's what the accountant will say the problem is with the C corp. And if you make the S corp, then that doesn't happen. That money passes through into your personal account and is only taxed once. But there's certain things that you can't do with the S corp, like insurance. So he mentioned all this insurance money. If you're a C corp, you can deduct all of the insurance money, and there are other perks to it as well. So I tend to let the corporation, we are recording this. I tend to let the corporation buy a lot of things that the corporation needs and make less money myself. Generally how it works. When I get paid, I am double taxed because the corporation already paid tax on it, and then I'm paying tax. So let's talk about back to that 51% taxation where you're a freelancer before you go to the Secretary of State and apply to make this entity, make an LLC or a corporation. People tend to not want to report that money. So, you made $300 this year and you mixed this album and you're like, nobody gave me a 1099 independent contractor form at the end of the year, and it wasn't reported any whoever's anybody important, and so I can just have this money without paying taxes on it. Well, first, that's illegal and you shouldn't do it. But second, if you report that money, you are a self-employed person. And so by reporting that money now, that self-employed business that you own has the ability to have deductions. So LLC, corporation, self-employed, you can all deduct business expenses. So you may have only made $300 in that mix this year, but if you didn't report that $300, then you couldn't deduct that $1,000 S1 fader pack that you bought to be part of your business. You would just be eating that. So there are definitely some benefits to, at whatever level you're at, actually reporting the money. You're going to have to pay 765% Social Security. You might have to pay it double. Depends on how you're structured. But when you're paying into that system, it does have huge rewards later on. It's hard to see it as somebody who's 20 years old, even 30 years old. But later on, you'll be happy that you paid that money in because you're accruing time served, time that you worked. And so when you're looking at retiring later on at 65 or 75 or whatever the number ends up being, that becomes important. It's hugely important to be able to deduct your expenses. It helps with your taxes. Plus, you're probably not profitable. How much do you have to invest in supplies, hard drive, computer, materials, advertising, marketing, whatever it is, to get that $300 mix you got this year? It would be to your benefit to actually report it, even though you can pay a lot of taxes on it, just so you can use that offset in deductions. Anything to add to the deduction side? Or?
Yeah, plenty to add to deductions. But I would also say that reporting your income also establishes your business income. And if you're kind of not reporting it and sliding under the radar for a while, and you've been doing this for 5 or 7 years, I'm like, okay, great. I need to go rent a building and get a $50,000 loan for some gear. Without that business income, you have no history of success, and you're never going to get a lease signed or a loan.
And so you may as well start doing it now, because it's all about length of time. How long have you been running this entity or this business?
And then along lines of deductions, you will all get a standard deduction off of your income of like $4,300 or whatever it is now. I'm not sure what it's at right now. So you'd have to make sure that your expenses exceeded the standard deduction. But you can expense everything. Absolutely. This can definitely expense it. This is a business meeting and
I
No
definitely deducted.
you're using this for business, deduct.
Yes,
Um,
my uniform, you know what color shirt I wear, y'all. This is my uniform. I
Yeah.
buy this because of the business and my,
Yeah.
and myself.
Yeah, right. I deduct everything.
Yeah,
I deduct my phone,
Oh,
I'm-
my cars.
sure,
Yeah, I deduct my cars.
I deduct, well, I just deduct everything. So,
Software, computers, everything. Rent, electric, bills, insurance, all those are expenses for the business.
Can you deduct all your rent if you're,
uh,
yeah?
well, you can, deduct your, the amount of square footage you use for business purposes in the place you rent, you can deduct. There's no federal rule on how much that is. It could be 100% of your space. Do that, they're going to not believe you. Or maybe it's 50% or 30%, but each state or in each municipality might have a rule on that as well. In Indiana, I think that the state only allows you to deduct up to 500 square feet of total space, no matter how large your home-based business is. Now, if you're just a corporation or whatever, yeah, you deduct it all. But for you personally doing freelance work, if you have if you're using your bedroom to do mixing and recording in, yeah, you can deduct that amount. And if your rent was say just to make it easy, $1,000 a month, and the bedroom is 30% of the house, you could deduct $300 a month. So $3,600 a year for that. Doesn't quite meet the standard deduction, but maybe all the music you buy, phone, of course, all your software, all that stuff, maybe that will start to exceed that standard deduction and could be worthwhile.
And those end of the year sales in December after the winter holidays, then people want to get rid of their inventory. Because businesses have to pay tax on their remaining inventory at the end of the year. That's why really the best sale is the very, very end of the year. And I can go and look and see how much money I've spent on my business and then go and spend. I buy a lot of gear. You don't know me, but some people can attest to this. Maybe not as much as Jake does. Jake might win this one. But definitely at the end of the year, I'll go and buy whatever I want. You know, that new Nord keyboard or whatever I've been dreaming about that business space because I want to fit it into that tax year. Or if I've already spent too much, maybe I'll wait until January 1st to pre-plan it, preload it for the next year. But yeah, it's definitely something to be thinking about and looking at and taking advantage of.
And how do you keep track of your income and expenses and all your tax documents throughout the year?
I have a great accountant. I have a great accountant and I use Quicken. Yeah, it's QuickBooks for home and it's super easy. You create categories. So it's like QuickBooks. But I can create business categories and it works fine for me as far as what my accountant needs to see. He says, how much did you spend on marketing? How much did you spend on office supplies? How much did you spend on business meetings? How much do you and I can just look at it and all my credit cards and bank accounts automatically link to Quicken. And I don't know, it's cheap. It's not $100 a year.
So whenever you make a purchase, you just open Quicken and.
No, I don't. I wait until April 12th and call my accountant and say, I've got to meet with you like today. He's like, I'm super busy. So I've really got to meet with you. And then he said, well, do you have all your documents? I said, well, I can get them. And then I go and I try and get Bank of America to download and everybody else to download. They only go back a year and now I can't get everything from January and February and try and recreate it. So, I mean, I would rather be honest with you. No, I don't, don't do it every day.
Yeah.
But I do try not to, well, it's easy to not spend cash now. Buy everything through checks or credit cards. And so at least it's linked somewhere that I can go back and find it.
Yeah, Yeah, same basic idea for me. With QuickBooks, and Quicken, yeah, you can do all that auto tracking and it can update everything. But it gets unmanageable really quickly when that happens. Especially if there are returns or it can get pretty weird. So you end up having to go through line by line, at tax time with everything and trying to categorize things better, because while you can certainly subcategorize things, expenses, and when it auto tracks things, it becomes hard to do.
I would say at the very, very least, if you want to, I mean, I'm old and so I like old school. I would say if you are trying to run a business, get yourself a 79-cent spiral notebook and a pencil and write down every single time that you spend money or make money off of your business until you come up with a better system. It's kind of like keeping track of every session that you ever do. At least if you have a record and it's unorganized, you still have a record. Instead of thinking, oh, well, I wonder maybe I could find that receipt, things like that.
Yeah.
And it's not that much work if you do that. But for me, I just use credit cards, and then, I have 20 credit cards because this one gives me no interest until March, but then I'm going to move to the one that gives me no interest till. So I'm always juggling things like that. This one gives me 3% back on food, but this one will give me 1.5% back on anything. So depending on where I'm buying, so things get spread out too much, but at least it all shows up, and then I just categorize.
I see. Super helpful.
Yeah, you should have a separate bank account for the business.
You should.
So,
Sam Bank free.
moving on to a different section, you both mentioned advertising a little while ago. Do you do advertising for your businesses? Do you pay someone to do advertising, or do you try and generally go off of word of mouth? Like, what's that look like for you?
I did in the 90s. I did a strong advertising push, put in thousands of dollars, professional photos, ads in magazines, national magazines. Zero work came from that. A definitive zero. So I have not advertised since and never intend to advertise again. Of course, now with social media, you are all in a much better position to have that advertising kind of take care of itself. In fact, for the past couple of years, I haven't even had a website because I just get too many emails from it. So I just rely on people finding me. And that's always the best way. The best way to be successful is by word of mouth. If you advertise too much, you're going to get the Blues Vanity Project. You know, a bunch of those phone calls. And that's no fun. So yeah, that being said, I have an Instagram page now, but I don't think it's active yet. I don't know, Max will need to put some stuff on there. But I mean, that would be more than enough advertising. People are going to see a picture of that console and go nuts on whenever that goes up.
But I think for me, it's a little bit different with Cage microphones, that I'm always actively advertising. I can't count on distributors, wholesalers to buy my products to sell to the public for me if I'm not supporting my product. And so I need to run ads in Recording Magazine, Mix Magazine, and Sound on Sound, and do Instagram posts and offer all kinds of things. For my recording career and engineering work, I've never not one time advertised. The website is the most, and I don't even, I own chandlerbridges.com. I don't even think I have anything up on it. You know, I think for Jake, obviously the cost of that website and of any of the Square stuff and the processing fees and all that, some of that might go into the advertising category at the end of the year when we talk to the accountant and be able to use those expenses and deduct them. And for Gauge microphones, it's huge. I mean, we're willing to pay a lot of money to acquire a customer. So customer acquisition, I mean, if I pay $25, but they're buying a microphone from me, that's a totally different formula. There's a saying that you're only as good as your last credit. Of course, I've always already said that you can't get your credits anymore, and you only get about 20% of them to show up anyway. But it's that word of mouth. So what you did last and the connection that you make from somebody who had a really good time, good experience with you, and then they're talking to their buddy who needs somebody to engineer something or mix something, and that's kind of an organic way that the careers develop. So hard to thing about freelance gig is that if you are a freelancer and you're not at a post house or with a live sound company or the union, then how do you keep developing contacts? Because you're not advertising, and if you take a big long project and you've taken yourself out of the running, out of the market for a little while as well.
All right, well, let's see what else. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to kind of open up? We've got about 30 minutes left, so. Is there anything else on here that you wanted to go over?
Yeah. I'm curious. How do you budget for new gear?
This might be a loaded question.
That's a tough one.
I'm going to take notes on whatever you say.
Okay, so sometimes it's just by necessity, like you need this thing, so you have to buy this thing. Like, I don't know, a couple years ago, I needed a portable remote recorder. Oh, so I just had to buy it. And that's that. But for the big purchases, I had been thinking about an upgrade to the big console we saw a picture of. Chandler and I had talked about it a lot prior, and it was about a year that had been talked about, and at some point I started to see that it might be a possibility, but it was tied into refinancing of my building. And one of the things that really sold it for me was a business guy I know. He's is an investment broker. He was a client as well. He's like, this is not that much money. I mean, it seemed like a huge amount of money to me. And then he just started to explain, like, yeah, I mean, you can buy this console and then write it off. And how much you paying in taxes a year right now, you won't be paying that in taxes. So that's part of it. But what really sold me on this big equipment purchase was I'm not a fan of Donald Trump, but he was in the news for losing, $1 billion in like 1999 or something, and he hasn't paid taxes since because that loss is so great that it offsets his income every year on down the line. So, like, if the president of the United States hasn't paid taxes in 20 years because he had this massive loss, then why can't I? So I began to understand, particularly with my business guy, the government doesn't want you to pay taxes. They want you to buy, spend. They're going to get the money anyways, because somebody's got to pay taxes on that. But they'd much rather you pour money into the economy, buy stuff, consume. And they make it beneficial to you. So with the big gear budget, I look at my actual expenses, how much money I actually need to make to survive, or cash on hand, versus how much can I delay, write off, deduct from my taxes at the end of the year and receive a big giant refund from all this money that's been taken out of my IU pay since I happen to work here. If I didn't work at IU, I might have a different view on some of that, but in this case, I'm not gonna pay, I'm gonna get all my IU tax money back for the next several years.
Plus the console that Jake got is incredible. I mean, it's one of the best consoles in the entire world. I'm like, Jake, you gotta get it. Yeah, man. Work here. It's gonna be awesome. I mean, no one for how far has one anything like this. I mean, it's a game changer as far as what that studio can offer to someone who doesn't know the area. I mean, if you're from LA or New York or Nashville and you find out that he's got this 4000 E console, SSL solid state logic console, you're like, okay, that's legit. So not only is it a write-off and gonna actually save him, I mean, who's he gonna give the money to? Somebody he bought the console from or to the government?
Yep.
So he's giving it, got the console instead. It's gonna up the studio's value. It's gonna up the reputation. Not only that, the thing sounds ridiculous. You've worked on it. You're like, it's the sound of modern music. It's the sound of what great records sound like. You can just get near the console and it sounds like a hit. So it's like, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, and it also,
The speakers. Hey, then he went and bought these
Oh, yeah,
speakers,
okay.
and I'll tell you, I don't know what tax thing he's got going on with that, but it must be something because he's got these
Yeah.
nice speakers.
No, I think that it also gives you, like, gives me a certain confidence level, there's different, but there's not better than this. So, I think it legitimizes you, and, if I were to go to a convention where maybe someone doesn't know my name, they go, oh, what kind of console do you have? I sell 4000 new standard, ATC speakers. Like, oh, so they will definitely get their attention. Whereas prior it would be like, oh, I'm all in the box and we have this and that. Great. But that's kind of a different story. Yeah, I don't know where he's going to go with that.
Well, I'm putting together an Atmos room at my house. And so at the end of the year, I thought, okay, what do I need to go ahead and buy? Because I'm gonna wrap up my tax here. So I bought my 7 main speakers for the surround. I got my 4 height channels. I bought the sub. I thought, oh, I need to go and buy the Matrix Studio, another $5,000, and I'm gonna get these up, and some stuff I put off until this year. But these things are, again, it's who do you want to give your money to? And so you're really just choosing to either know how the system works and use it the right way. Like Jake said, but the government wants GDP, the government wants things to look good for us. And so I don't know if you've discovered this yet or not, but if you make $12,000, the government's not going to do much for you. And if you make $40,000, now you're getting all these different perks. You might make $12,000 or $15,000 a year and get to keep most of that. Or you might make $50,000 or $40,000 and spend $38,000 to make that $50,000. So you're making less money, but the government loves that. You're getting all these incentives and tax credits because you're doing the work. You're spending the money and you're bringing in the money. Nobody said you had to be smart about business, right? You can actually lose money, like the $1 billion. You can spend more than you make, and all of that contributes to the way that our country is perceived. And so some of that, you understanding what the perks are, what the laws are, it's not cheating on your taxes if you're using the rules that they set forth and are following them and are reporting everything and being honest. And so I think there's a great structure once you understand that. This is why I said you should report your lawn cutting money, report your $300 you got from doing that mix, because that puts you into this different category as somebody who is an entrepreneur, somebody who is running a business, even if it's not an LLC or an S Corp or C Corp. It is a business. You're acting as a business, and that gets a certain level of respect and reward in this country.
Along those lines, I think something that is worth talking about too is debt. Of course, debt. You gotta have debt. You must establish good credit early on. You don't need a ton of debt. Hopefully you can get out of school with minimal student debt. hope for everybody. I think it's college costs is absurd, but that's a different story. But you can't, the idea that you have no debt, giant mistake. You need to have debt and you need to always pay your bills on time and get a great credit rating. Because if you have a credit score above 700, then you can report your income. Say you're making $30,000 a year from your business income, great credit rating, a track record of some success in your business. You go to a bank and say, here, I have this plan. Here's my credit of, or my rate of my history of success. Here's my credit rating. The bank's going to go, history of success. Ooh, credit rating 782. How much would you be needing? That's the only way to do it. You can't get a loan without that established credit rating, and it takes a while to build that up to a high enough level that anybody cares about it.
And the perspective of understanding this, I think, is very difficult. And I had a situation in a class here at IU that I think completely exemplifies this. We were talking about post-production. It was in a 321 class for visual media. And one student said, this is a pretty good package of equipment that you could buy and actually be able to make money. And we were discussing what would it take to do live production audio for film, TV, commercials, things like that. And you need a boom pole, and you need a shotgun mic and a dead cat and a baffle and mix pre and all this gear. And we figured out that it was $10,000. And the guy says, $10,000, that's a pretty good price to be able to have this equipment that would then be able to allow you to go and do this work. And I remember 99% of the people in the class, everybody else except for this one person said, oh my gosh, $10,000 is so much money. We're poor students. We're eating ramen. You're never going to afford that. And it's like, you got to have the vision. You got to have the vision to not be so petrified of debt, not let the money you have dictate what you're going to do, but come up with a plan of what you want to do and then make it happen. I owe $180 something thousand in student loan debt. Yay. I don't care. I don't care. Would that stress out other people? Yes. So I publicly tell you this number so you can feel better about your life. Your $15,000 you're going to graduate in debt is like, okay, but Chandler's got 180 grand. And it's going up. And it just goes up and up and up because they don't make me pay anything because of COVID postponing it. And, they stop some interest, but not all. I mean, what are you going to do? Well, I'm not worried about that. I had to supply myself with the resources I needed to be successful. Whether it's a coffee shop and you can't have a coffee shop without an espresso machine. You don't want to go buy the one at Walmart for $49. You're going to spend 10 grand on an espresso machine. 10 grand, a lot of money. But you have to have it. You want to do live sound, production sound for film and TV, 10 grand. You got this great rig. Now you can go do the work. So when do you get a new perspective on money? And I think for me, I have a weird perspective on money because I've been hustling being an entrepreneur since I was 6 years old. And I would do magic shows. I charged $50 an hour in 1978. $50 a half an hour. Sorry, let me not say it. $50 a half an hour in 1978. That was good money. And I sold Amway. I went door to door. I've done all kinds of crazy businesses and coffee shops and restaurants and clothing stores and all kinds of other stuff. And so my perspective on money is a little different. I know that a retail store is going to cost $10,000 a month in expenses. I know I need to buy whatever I sell. I know I need to mark stuff up double. To spend $15,000 in a month, $30,000 in a month doesn't faze me. I enjoy it. I like shopping. And so buying and equipping the store and spending that money, while it can be scary, how do you get started? Well, you can't open a store with nothing in it. You've got to buy the stuff. At some point, you've got to get that perspective. And for some of my students that have gone out and work in studio, it's when they see the budgets, when they work with big clients and they start to see these bigger numbers or they get paid more, that things flip. It becomes, you think about the money a little bit differently once you're around more money. Tom Carey, a student of mine, goes and does all these Kanye sessions. And Kanye flies him to Africa, and it was a big fiasco, and he gets paid $1,500 a day. Well, now his perspective on money is very different. $1,500 a day, he goes and he buys himself a BMW that he works every day of the year. He's got tons of money, more than he knows how to spend. But at some point, he was from Florida and he used to make $7.50 an hour. And that was a very different perspective. And so I don't know how you can change your perspective until that moment happens for you. But I want to echo what Jake is saying about debt. Like, yeah, you need to establish credit. Things cost money. It's okay. You're going to lose money. I lost $100,000 doing a store in New Orleans. It was one of the best years of my life. I lost $100,000. What are you going to do? I'm not going to cry about it because being upset, crying about it is not going to get the money back. It's not going to do anything. Just dust yourself off, try again, right? And make it happen. But I think having the courage to take the risk is something that is the entrepreneurial spirit. That is kind of how you're going to get started in the freelance world. And then the music business is tough.
All right, well, we've got about 15 minutes left, so does anyone else have any questions?
I might be able to spark a question from somebody. Who wants to either buy equipment and try to make money with that equipment, or even go so far as to have a studio business and make money with that? Okay, so which one? Max, you already own a bunch of equipment.
Yeah.
So that's a substantial amount of video money. So is that what you want to continue doing, owning freelance equipment like that, or you want a building where people come to you?
I have not really considered what that second option would entail, so it hasn't really crossed my mind a whole lot. But yeah, the whole video thing for me has really been a thing that's grown the past couple of years because there's a lot of people around here that are in need of video services because there's just not a lot of that. Even just in Indiana, but also specifically Bloomington. And I mean, when I eventually move out to like LA or something, they have way too much of it. So I don't know if I'm going to get the same business that I do there, but I mean, here alone, it's made me more money than it's costed me to get the equipment. So it just seems worth it.
Yeah. So that's the thing, you're in that sweet spot of being able to make more than the equipment costs. Anybody else?
Do you have a drone?
I don't have
Okay, so and what about drones aren't cheap, the good ones,
Mhm.
and you spend $2,000 on a drone, but how could that change your business if you added the drone? I mean, I haven't seen a wedding video package in a long time that didn't have some drone shot coming down.
Yeah, weddings and real estate videos. Those are the two things that really use drones a lot. I guess there's maybe some music videos that do as well, but those are the two ones. I don't even know how prevalent the whole real estate video thing is around here, but I know in other places that's a pretty big market.
So $2,000 investment plus maintenance and upkeep. How much would that yield in addition? Do you even want to do weddings? Some people find them quite nice and fun.
Yeah, they can be stressful.
They can be really stressful. People are stressed out.
Yeah, I've worked like a couple of them from a connection that I have who graduated from the video program or film program in Ball State, and I don't enjoy doing them, but the people can make pretty good money doing it.
And then what if Max invested in a van and the drone and a second rig, and then started hiring people for $15 an hour, and they go and do the wedding under his tutelage and training, and now he's making, how much can he make off of that? So it starts to be something where spending that money on that gear can, if you're smart about it, can be really huge.
Yeah, I've also found that for me, finding like the minimum amount you can spend to get the maximum results, because like I really have to assess the camera equipment that I'm buying, because I can spend the amount that I paid and get the quality that I got, but I don't think if I spent any less that I could have gotten that, and I could have spent way more and really not gotten a whole lot extra on top of it. So I think you really have to just do a lot of research is what I've found.
For sure. And back to Jake's question, who else sees like the studio? Who does anybody studio?
Yeah, it's always been a dream of mine to like sort of open up a studio where I go in and record solo artists like who really want to like get their ideas out there and help them get their ideas out there. Like sort of like, do you know like what Dan Negro is doing out in LA right now? So how plausible is that like related to like what we're talking about?
I think that you need to establish your career probably first. I haven't opened up a business when there were no, there's one other studio in Blooming at the time, and it was a big studio and was always booked. So I had a shot at that time to make it successful. And again, it was just the right time. But you probably need to get good before doing that. Don't necessarily have to. So I'll just run numbers real quick. The real estate cost is going to be based on the city you're in. Almost everything else is about the same everywhere. All the other expenses. So with a little bit of variation, like in electricity prices, property taxes or something, but that would be included in the real estate cost. So you're in LA in a 3,000 square foot building. That's
what?
Yeah. Then you're spending
millions.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of money. But let's say, let's just avoid the real estate costs for now. Go down utilities. Well, it's going to be electricity is going to be minimum 300 a month, probably higher. If you're in a place where the climate is colder, you might have natural gas, and that's going to be say 100 a month if you take it out over 12 months. So what are we up to? 1,200 plus 300 times 12, 3,600, 4,800. Let's call it $5,000 a year in utilities. Phone is going to be $100 a month. 6,200. Internet $100 a month. 7,400. Then business insurance. It's going to be $4,000 a year. That takes it up to 11,400. And you're going to need that business insurance policy whether you're a freelancer or if you own a brick and mortar store, because most companies won't allow someone to enter their property for business purposes unless they carry a liability policy, usually a minimum of $2 million. You can't do work for IU as a freelance company or as a company unless you prove to them you have that $2 million liability insurance. So what did I cover? 11.4, electricity, gas, phone, internet,
Pest control.
Sure, if you own a business, you have to deal with groundskeeping, pest control, trash, and that all ends up being, collectively $100 a month.
Trash can, you have to rent a trash can, then you have to pay somebody to dump it, and they charge you based on the weight. That's why McDonald's doesn't want you to go put your crap in their dumpster. And pest control is a real thing, and repairs,
and you should your repair budget is going to be dependent upon the kind of gear you have, and upgrades, software licenses.
How about employees? Because that's always one of the more expensive.
That's a whole different thing there.
$100 a day is another $36,000 a year.
Yeah. So without employees, I think that your basic expenses is going to be say $20,000 a year to have a business
What was the rent you did? Did you say
I
1,200?
didn't talk about rent, probably a little bit less than 20, between 16 and 20 expenses, no rent. Then add your rent depending on your market on top of that. So,
I mean, what do houses cost around here if you wanted a freestanding building?
300,000.
a month.
How much?
I think around 3,000 a month.
Yeah, I mean, for 3,000 a month, you should be able to get some kind of nice commercial space. Say you got lucky at 2,000 a month, so we're up to 24 grand.
44 grand.
Yeah, and then if you take that and divide that by the months, because I'd take it back to the month because I've got to pay the bills monthly. And so how much money do I have to make?
I was gonna say you need insurance for your equipment too, I would imagine.
It's part of that.
It's
business
insurance,
trip.
yeah. But you know, so now if we're doing 10 days of studio time a month, I mean, this is how we can, the calculus somebody figures out. Is so we got $4,000 a month to cover and we got 10 days, we got to charge $400 a day to make zero money.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then if we charge $500 a day, then we make $1,000 a month. So you can actually make $12,000 a year, which I think is a number I used a little bit ago. Something. It's ramen is great. We eat really lots with that.
But those are realistic numbers. And the only variation is going to be really your location and your and size.
And they're hoping people pay you timely.
Yeah. And so, you know, you might say, oh, well, let's say it's $36,000 is your total expenses per year, $3,000 a month, just to make the math easy on us. Let's say, like, oh, well, I plan on having 10 days a month booked, so I can charge $300 a day and break even. Well, maybe for January, February, March, and April, you make 300, you have 10 days a month booked and you're fine. But then May hits and you only have 7 days a month booked. And now you're short $1,000. That has to come from somewhere. So you have to look beyond the month. You have to look at the day, the week, the month, and the year, and how that all kind of comes together.
And the expenses never stop. I hate to bring it up, but professional fees, so we've got to pay the accountant. Even if you're using Quicken or QuickBooks, I mean, you can try and do it, but the bigger the business, the harder, the more complex the accounting gets. And you want to take advantage of all the tax laws and all the changes that are happening. It's hard to know all of that. And then, oh, somebody can sue you, or you might not be able to get paid. And so how do you get that money? Now you got to hire an attorney. The attorney that I retain in town is $450 an hour. They're good, so I hear. But you know, that's a lot of money. And so if we got a $5,000 retainer because they flaked on, you got somebody who flaked on $5,000 and the attorney wants $5,000 to take the case, like you're not gonna, like, what do you do? So then you just not ever collect the money and eat it? Well, you can deduct that as a loss. You got ripped off that money, so that can be a loss. But I mean, this stuff gets complicated. I always like to throw out pest control because it's like one of the things that most people don't think about. It's like, yeah, like if you got ants or termites, like you got to fix that. Like you can't have that stay. And who knows what other, I'm sure there are countless other expenses I'm forgetting. And we're not even doing any advertising or marketing.
So is what you're saying, like, if you're known better, like, as like a producer, engineer, or whatever you are, then you can charge more for that stuff, and then you can have a better business model, I guess, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that coming out of nowhere, let's say you graduate 3.5 years or 2.5 years, whatever it is, 3.5 for you, 3.25, and you open up a studio business right away. Maybe you do an amazing job, but how's anybody going to know that? Because you don't have any real track record. So it's going to be hard to get that rate, hard to get consistent clients. I think it is not an impossible thing to do that. But I think that you would miss a lot by not being in a professional environment with other professionals for a few years.
Yeah.
Certainly I didn't. I mean, I think I would have been better earlier had I mean, I was around other engineers for sure, but not like working at an LA studio for 2 years or something.
Which I think is super, super smart way to go. Plus, if you're a freelancer and you've got clients, then you make deals with studio owners. And so if I had clients here in town, I would be saying to Jake, okay, Jake, I got these clients with these budgets. Actually, I need to have this conversation with you. I've got these clients with these budgets. And so I want to know, what kind of rate can I get? Can I go ahead and just say, I want 40 hours this month? You'll give it to me at this rate. Then I might bill my clients double that rate. So I'm making money off of the relationship that I've developed with Jake or with studio owner or something like that. And then studios really love it if you're a multi-room facility, commercial facility. They really want an engineer that's got so much work that they can become their room. And I can just take Studio A as my room all the time, and I'll have it booked the 12 or 15 or however many days a month, and then just leave it, let me have it. And this is exactly the story of Manny Marroquin at Larrabee. And he was booking that studio so much, and again and again and again. And then finally, Kevin Mills, who owns the studio, is like, I wouldn't mind selling off one or two of my studios around town, and I wouldn't mind getting rid of my rental company. And then finally, Manny bought the studio. And so Manny owns Larrabee North because he worked in that room so much and made so much money. Then Kevin was in the right place at the right time, and Kevin wanted out. And you find, I think, Noah, that a lot of these studios, whoever owns them in the moment, they have some interesting stories. Buddy at Conway showed up one day to Conway Studios, which is a fabulous studio in LA, and he started hosing off the driveway. And hosing off the driveway, and whoever was there liked his initiative. Now, 40 years later, he owns the studio. So it's like, how do you never know what will come of inserting yourself in that commercial world, that professional world, and then seeing how it develops.
All right, well, I do believe we are out of time. Thank you so much for being here.